The story begins with a man watching the news on his TV, where it is reported that a mysterious game called Apocalypse has recently gained immense popularity on the internet. With its successful launch, many game lovers around the world quickly became addicted to that game. But what still puzzled everyone was the true identity of its developer, which remained a total enigma. It was as if they had simply appeared out of nowhere. However, our protagonist, named Hao Han, doesn't seem interested in any of this. Sitting on his couch, he just takes another sip of his beer while stating that he would never play a game in his life. Thus, completely drunk, Hao Han rises from his couch and, throwing the can he was drinking from away, he stumbles toward his bed. He lazily lays down next to his Dakimakura pillow, where he then falls into a deep sleep. Some time passes, and in an unusual way, Hao Han is awakened by a female voice calling him. He opens his sleepy eyes, and to his surprise, there was a beautiful woman right on top of him. Initially, the protagonist is disoriented, and looking at that woman, he ends up thinking that it must all be a dream. He vaguely wonders what it could be, but suddenly he feels something strange pressing against his body down below. Surprised, Hao Han reacts reflexively and accidentally ends up touching the woman's breasts, who moans as they are grabbed. Finally realizing what he was doing, the guy looks at it confused before getting scared and screaming as loud as he can. Desperately, he pushes the girl away and asks who the hell she is. The girl seems frustrated, disappointed that she came so close to taking the protagonist's virginity. But she then introduces herself as Ren Junki from the Fleeting Fortune group, and she apologizes for almost violating his body, stating that it was an urgent situation. The woman gets closer and closer, and the embarrassed protagonist ends up recognizing that name from somewhere, but both are interrupted. Hao Han hears a noise and looks back horrified, and when least expected, a large naked werewolf jumps, bursting through the house's window while howling. The werewolf tries to attack the guy, but a large vortex of flames hits it squarely, throwing the werewolf far away. The protagonist looks at the damage in disbelief, realizing that the author of that was Junki, who exclaimed that no one would hurt her lord until she completed his extraction. The two then look down, and more werewolves appear from where that one came. The woman, however, seems calm. She just asks the protagonist to wait while she jumps towards the werewolves, and he is left behind perplexed. Hao Han looks at it, the whole chaotic situation, and goes into shock, only able to ask himself what the hell was going on. But he is interrupted by the voice of an entity coming from within his TV, which laughs at the fact that the game it claims to have developed was so powerful. On the television, a face was presented, of funny appearance, and that thing questions the boy if he would be ready for the exciting events that were to come. The boy just stares at that thing in silence, before he himself explodes, grabbing a chair and threatening it while questioning the entity about who it would be. The electronic entity feels offended, introducing itself as the creator of the game Apocalypse, and that it would soon be the supreme ruler of the real world. Hao Han stops his attack, questioning the machine if it would be the developer of that mysterious game he heard about earlier. The machine then says that its name is Wangxiang, proclaiming itself as a hyper-AI system, the same artificial intelligence that created that popular game with only 10% of its capacity. Annoyed, Hao Han points to the hole in the wall of his house and questions it if that chaos outside would be its fault as well. Wangxiang then responds that playing games only on the phone is too boring, stating that such a thing did not show all its brilliance. It then affirms that after 10,086 improvements, it deliberately broke the dimensional barrier, merging the realities of its game with the real world, and both the woman and the werewolf were characters from the game who came out of the wormhole to go after the protagonist. Even more irritated, Hao Han then questions why those creatures were after him when he had never even touched that game. Wangxiang, in response, says that all the characters from that world needed a savior, and that it ended up choosing him for that role by chance upon finding a photo of him. Thus, it continues revealing that as only characters from the other world can come to reality, and not vice versa, the girl from the beginning needed to collect the protagonist's essence through carnal acts. In this way, she could return to her world, and there give birth to a new savior who could save it. Knowing that, Hao Han could not contain his joy, already asking the system when more girls would come after his body. Excited by that idea, Hao Han does not even hesitate. He already begins to warm up to prepare for the carnal battles that were to come. But his joy unfortunately does not last long, as the system quickly cuts off his excitement, saying that it would not be as pleasant as he thinks. To the protagonist's misfortune, it is revealed that committing the act of intercourse with any of the girls would result in either his upper or lower head being inevitably cut off. Hao Han immediately loses all his motivation, already starting to pack his things. The system questions where he was going, and Hao Han replies that he's leaving while everyone is fighting out there, but it was already too late. The system tells him to look back, and the boy then looks there curiously. But the curiosity in his eyes soon turns to horror. Several wormholes already infested the gloomy sky with their purplish hue, and it seemed the first fall had begun. The civilians observe the wormholes in a mix of terror and confusion as they wonder what those things would be. From a distance, while watching all that confusion, Hao Han questions the system about the pillars of light in the middle of the city with an astonished face. So the artificial intelligence retorts that with the breaking of the dimensional barrier, the equipment, items, and characters from his game had arrived in the real world. And from now on, with clear rejoicing, no one would need to play games on their phones anymore. For now, their lives were the game. Hearing all that insane idea, Hao Han quickly recognized that the system was crazy and began to think of some countermeasure. But at that point, what would be the point of running away if everyone was after him? He thought, but was interrupted as his attention was drawn by a scream. The scream came from Junki, who, facing the Wolf King, didn't seem like she could hold on much longer. Worried, Hao Han then turns his gaze to the entity, ordering it to at least give him some equipment so he could go protect her immediately. But things were not so simple. Even being the chosen one, Wangxiang explains with laughter that he would first have to entertain him to earn the necessary points to get his equipment. Even with a bad feeling about it, time demanded action. So he ended up accepting the idea and tried to make the first funny face that came to his mind. And rejoicing in his interpretation of Xiao Qi, the system unusually rewards him with 30 points. With those points obtained, Hao Han now has the opportunity to choose between 3 options of cards of different colors. Confidently, he doesn't even think twice before pulling the red skill card. Immediately after pulling the random skill card, Hao Han gains the power of the Burning Explosion Fist, a level C skill. A skill bracelet then materializes on our protagonist's wrist to equip his newly acquired skill. And so, even realizing that against Earth-type opponents like werewolves, his power had a disadvantage, lacking options, he ends up equipping it. Power flows through the bracelet as he places the Burning Fist card, and Hao Han now saw himself fully prepared to act. On the other side, the situation for the girl didn't seem good at all. With no chance to fight back, she had just been hit by one of the werewolves, and the attack was so strong that it even tore part of her clothes, knocking her to the ground. Subjugated, there seemed to be no more hope for the girl. She apologized to her father, accepting that this would be her end, and that she had failed in her mission. The werewolf then prepares his final merciless blow, and the girl, just waiting, desperately closed her eyes. But before he could deliver his attack, a trail of flames leaps from the house, heading toward him swiftly. It is Hao Han, who intervenes by striking the monster's jaw with a powerful flaming punch. With the impact, the werewolf soon explodes, being driven into the ground and defeated with a single blow. After defeating that monster, he lands near the girl, who immediately falls in love, admiring the display of power from her lord. With both his fists enveloped in flames, Hao Han silently observes his defeated opponent burn. More werewolves appeared behind the protagonist. Junki, worried, alerts her lord as quickly as she could, but he was already aware of that futile attack, ordering them all to leave and taking them down with a single strike. Right after defeating them, Hao Han immediately shoots against the Wolf King, his real target. He lets out a roar and both charge towards each other, but who stands out is the protagonist, who strikes first with a flaming punch to the king's stomach, causing him to burst from the inside out. Smoldering, the Wolf King then falls to the ground. With his death, Hao Han gains experience points, and without a leader, all the other werewolves flee as fast as they can. Some time passes, and when the situation calms down, he finds himself patching the hole in his house, while Wangxiang endlessly talks about how amazing his game was. Enraged, Hao Han stops what he's doing and yells at him, once again emphasizing that he hates playing games. But he's cut off by Junki, still half naked, who asked if he could continue with the extraction. Hao Han finds himself quite tempted, but at that moment he's reminded that he would be killed on the spot if he did that, so he becomes nervous. As a way out of the situation, he makes up any excuse, running to the door under the pretext of going to buy a snack and then fleeing from there. But upon opening the door, there was a woman waiting for him. Caught off guard by a female voice telling him not to move, the protagonist was pushed to the ground. With the push, he falls abruptly, but before he could get up, someone steps on him. Looking up, he realizes that it was a well-dressed woman, and she was accompanied by several inspection officers. Her badge identifies her as Special Agent Lin Fei, and apparently, they were there on suspicion of an abnormal intruder in his house. The protagonist tries to explain himself, but he becomes too hypnotized by the view he had from below to form a word at first. But before he could speak, all the officers under Lin Fei's command storm his house to carry out the inspection anyway. The police search the entire house, turning his home upside down, but they don't find anything abnormal. And Hao Han, in turn, finds himself quite confused as he looks around and doesn't find the girl from another world there. Considering himself lucky, he nervously reaffirms that none of it made sense and that he was just an ordinary citizen. But in the midst of it, the woman spots something and bends down to look for it. And that's when Hao Han hears a small laugh. Looking more closely, it was coming from Wang Xiang, who had materialized in the woman's communicator, mocking him. Irritated, he yells at him to shut up, slapping him but accidentally hitting the agent's buttocks in the process. An uncomfortable silence takes over the room. Realizing the mess he just made, the protagonist apologizes while just staring at her, frozen. That awkward silence is then broken by the agent's furious outburst, who pulls out one of her inflatable dolls and orders the officers to take that pervert so she could interrogate him personally. All the officers comply, and then take Hao Han to the patrol car. Inside, already with his hands cuffed, he tries to convince Lin Fei of his innocence, but she doesn't listen to him and just shouts at him to shut up. But both are interrupted by a sudden explosion beside them. The explosion came from the city bank, where the figure of a man with metallic tentacles emerged, laughing while several people cried out for help. Not just him, but several other monsters and characters from another world. They painted chaos everywhere, exploding and destroying everything they saw ahead. Seeing the world falling to pieces, Hao Han could only find himself astonished. However, further ahead, Lin Fei was already speaking into her communicator, consulting squads of heavy weaponry to stop the super criminals. Later, they finally arrive at the headquarters of Special Operations. There, Hao Han is taken to the interrogation room where he is left alone. A bit anxious, he asks the guards how long he will have to wait, but they don't seem to listen and simply leave. He then begins to ponder with himself, blaming the system for getting him into that mess. But it is at that moment that Wang Xiang projects himself onto one of the cameras, already mocking the fact that despite his powers, he allowed himself to be caught in that way. And as for Hao Han, as soon as he saw the appearance of that being, he immediately cursed him, shouting that if it weren't for his indiscriminate use of his image, things wouldn't have come to that point. Meanwhile, on the other side of the interrogation room, Lin Fei appears with her coffee in hand. She explains her method and questions how the protagonist is doing. But at that moment, looking at the camera, the result was the opposite of what she imagined. He kept making faces at the camera. Seeing that attitude, Lin Fei takes it as a challenge, exuding a heinous aura while admitting she had underestimated him. At the same moment, she turns her back and heads to the exit, stating that she will interrogate him personally while leaving the local agent behind. Thus, she leaves the monitoring room and heads to the interrogation room. But when she puts her hand on the door handle, she is interrupted by a male voice. It was the leader of the second squad, Tang Xiao. He was calling her out after work. However, without showing a hint of interest, Lin Fei immediately rejects him. She tries to open the door again, but is prevented by him. And obstinately, he continues insisting that she go out with him. But already fed up, Lin Fei gives him a frightening look, throwing in his face that she knows very well about his bad reputation of impregnating women, and threatens him if he dares to try flirting with her again. With that kick to the curb, before the guy could even protest, she enters the interrogation room and slams the door in his face. The man doesn't accept this, becoming clearly irritated. And to make matters worse, two women who saw this pass by, talking behind his back. They start gossiping among themselves about how much he was an opportunistic, weak man with no purpose, fueling his anger. And this escalated to the point where he lost his composure, furiously shouting at the women. Back inside the interrogation room, Lin Fei now asks a series of questions to the protagonist, who only claims to know nothing about what she was talking about. But regardless of what he said, the agent did not stop. She continued to question him about the damage to his house and why, of the monsters being after him. But Hao Han seems once again too distracted by the highly voluptuous breasts of the woman to respond to her appropriately. The scene then cuts to the staircase of the headquarters, in a dark place where laughter echoes. And there it is possible to see a room filled with blood with Tang Xiao at its center. Putting his pants back on, he displays a sadistic smile as he glances at his wrist, which reveals itself to be the same skill bracelet in possession of the protagonist, already swearing Lin Fei as his next target after the humiliation he made him endure. And so, letting out a wicked laugh, he walked away, leaving behind the bodies of the two women who had spoken behind his back and descending the stairs. In another department of the Special Operations, it is possible to hear Tang Xiao's voice. He questions if the director had already requested the verification of the amount of evidence. He was talking to another agent, who was handing him a series of documents, asking if they would have to investigate for the rest of the night. Tang Xiao then continues questioning if all the identified items had already been catalogued, something the agent confirms, indicating their locations. But when he realizes it, the agent, just as he finishes speaking, feels something cold piercing his chest. It was Tang Xiao, who, smiling, thrust through his chest, finishing by thanking the agent for his effort. Lifeless, the dead body of the young man collapsed to the ground, with the man continuing on his way. He was heading directly to his coveted artifacts from another world that had been seized by the police to steal them. Now on the other side of the headquarters, back on the stairs, a woman was startled and screamed. Worried, several guards climbed up, having their attention drawn by the noise. One of them went to the panicked woman and asked her what the problem was, but he is equally surprised to see the bodies of the two women who had been murdered. The guard immediately goes to inform the director of special operations, who, upon receiving that news, bangs his fist against his desk, finding it unbelievable. And both guards who witnessed that only confirmed that Tang Xiao was certainly the author of that mess. And before they could continue, they were interrupted by another agent who rushed into the room. He quickly announces that the suspect had been found near the evidence room. The agents find that strange, wondering what exactly he would be planning near the evidence room, but the director doesn't want to hear it. He abruptly rises from his chair, clenching his fists. He was clearly furious, and states that if that bastard dared to murder a colleague, then he deserves death. Volunteering to accompany the special forces, the director, along with several agents, goes to the evidence room. Once there, all the agents were armed with rifles and tactical shields in front of the exit door, just waiting for Tang Xiao. A messenger comes to the director, also informing him that all possible escape routes had already been blocked. And upon hearing this, he orders them to attack immediately. Given the order, one of the agents with a battering ram in hand then advances against the entrance door to break it down. But when he was about to break it, the door unexpectedly explodes, taking him and several other agents on the front line together. As the smoke clears, Tang Xiao walks through the entrance while mocking the special forces. As soon as they spot him, all the agents immediately fire at the man simultaneously. But he only smirks derisively, materializing a metal armor that protects him from the bullets fired at him. One of the agents panics, stating that he had managed to activate the identified object, but the director remains calm, shouting for them to initiate the anti-metal tactics. With the order given, the men act instantly, firing cryogenic grenades at the criminal. The grenades explode on the man, releasing liquid nitrogen to break his armor. However, Tang Xiao doesn't lose his smile and calls that kind of tactic naive. He quickly touches his bracelet, activating a fiery ability that envelops his body in flames and effortlessly melts all that ice. Seeing this, the director becomes concerned and understands the gravity of the situation, ordering the alarm to sound immediately and to evacuate the entire facility. One of the agents tries to protest, but before he can finish his sentence, the director is already charging toward the super criminal at full speed. Tang Xiao only grins wickedly and prepares a flaming punch against him, mocking the old man's audacity. The director counters, and both punches collide, generating a massive shockwave. But despite being burned, the director's strength prevails, managing to push his opponent away and buy some time. The impact sends flames even toward the evacuating agents, catching them in the midst. The fight continues. Back in the interrogation room, a loud groan of pain can be heard. Looking inside, Hao Han is being strangled by Agent Lin Fei. She presses him against the table, immobilizing him suggestively while demanding an answer. But in the midst of this, her attention is drawn by the sudden sound of the alarms. Confused, Lin Fei releases the protagonist and quickly heads outside, where she sees several agents fleeing the scene and asks them what the hell is going on. One of the fleeing agents desperately exclaims that Tang Xiao had undergone a mutation and that she should run as fast as possible. Lin Fei is taken aback by the news, but before she can process the information, the ceiling suddenly breaks, revealing the figure of a man in armor who lands right behind her. It was none other than Tang Xiao himself. He raises his gaze, staring at the agent with a malicious look, while expressing how happy he is to see her again. The woman acts quickly, drawing a pistol and aiming directly at the man. But it is futile. Inside the interrogation room, Hao Han is still recovering from the strangulation, muttering about how crazy that woman is, but he is suddenly startled by a loud crash. He looks to the side, and in an instant, he sees the image of Lin Fei being slammed against the entrance door by a man. The man removes his armor, pressing the young woman against the wall and initiating an attempt to sexually abuse her. She finds herself completely at the mercy of that man, who provokes her by challenging her to try to resist him again. Lin Fei seems out of options, and she ends up asking the protagonist for help to save her. But Hao Han was caught trying to sneak away. After being caught, in an attempt not to be dragged into that mess, he tries to explain, saying that he did not want to interrupt the two in any way or anything like that, and that he was just there by coincidence. Tang Xiao simply tells him to leave, and so he does without hesitation. However, just as Hao Han was about to leave, the system appears through a camera, imitating the exact tone of voice of the young man and deliberately provoking the criminal. The man takes the bait and gets irritated after hearing that insult, looking at Hao Han furiously and asking if he wanted to die. Hao Han gets nervous and immediately explains that it wasn't him, claiming it was all the camera's fault and that none of that was his intention. Tang Xiao doesn't seem to buy the idea, but he gives him one last chance and warns him to leave quickly, returning to what he was doing. The protagonist then follows the order and turns his back to leave as quickly as possible. But the system intervenes once again, and with the same voice, accuses the man of being an incompetent piece of trash. To Tang Xiao, that was the last straw. He looked at the young man once more, seething with rage, while Hao Han tried to explain himself again. However, this time the antagonist wouldn't let it slide. He materializes his metallic armor again and charges at him, roaring that he would tear him to pieces. With no options left but to fight, Hao Han quickly sacrifices 30 of his points to pull a last-minute card, which surprises Tang Xiao as he recognizes it. Hao Han pulls out a skill card and inserts it into his bracelet, acquiring the ability of the Draconic Blood Pillar. And so, with his new power, he unleashes a point-blank burst of fire at his opponent, who is forced to retreat by the explosion of flames. Tang Xiao recovers, frustrated for being so careless. The smoke eventually clears, and when it does, he realizes that both of them had used the flames as a distraction to escape. Also recognizing that the brat had been pretending to be weak all along, he soon smiles, saying that this could make the game more fun, and then from his bracelet, he summons a monster, which he orders to find them. Meanwhile, inside a computing session where Hao Han and Lin Fei both were extremely exhausted after having run non-stop to get there, but the young man sighs in relief, saying that they had finally managed to escape. But the system appears on one of the computers, not pleased, calling the protagonist a coward for having fled and surprising the woman, who, upon seeing a talking computer, asks what the hell it was. That Hao Han, on the other hand, doesn't seem to care in the slightest, seeing himself as determined. He then retorts that against all of that guy's abilities, it was impossible for him to win. The system then reinforces once again that he was the chosen one, and that if he wanted more points, it was simple. He just had to hurry and entertain it somehow. Amidst all that, Lin Fei finds herself completely perplexed, wondering if he and that computer were accomplices, but the protagonist cuts her off, claiming to be innocent, and so he explains that that thing was the real culprit behind all the catastrophe, and for breaking the dimensional barrier, with the system itself admitting it, without any shame. With everything explained, things finally begin to make sense to the girl. She deduces that Tang Xiao could have taken advantage of all this to steal the artifacts that the special forces had seized. Without hesitation, she turns her back. Hao Han questions where she is going, and she says she is going after her father, stating that at that point he was the only one capable of facing Tang Xiao. At that moment, the system interrupts her, showing an image of her father on the monitor, and looking back, she finds herself horrified. During her confrontation in the evidence room, it is revealed that the director had been burned alive, and now he was on the brink of death. Lin Fei despairs, calling out her father's name and trying to get there as fast as possible, but she is held back by Hao Han, who assures her that she will die if she goes there. The system warns them to hurry up and make a decision, spicing things up by showing that a monster was already on its way to that room. Lin Fei begins to cry, then desperately begs the boy to help her save her father, swearing to do anything for it. Hao Han hesitates, but the system states that it will give points if the girl manages to excite him. And with no options left, she, though hesitant, subtly lifts her skirt, but the system is disappointed. It says that kind of thing was too vague, and that it hadn't felt anything from it. It even taunts her, calling her unattractive, words that hit her hard. Not accepting that, Lin Fei revolts, stating that if that was the case, then she would give her all. She pushes the boy against the floor, and then lowers her panties completely. Hao Han finds himself just speechless. He beholds that seventh wonder of the universe, as if it were the last thing he would see in life. The scene cuts to the post-coital act between the two. Lin Fei, breathless, asks if that was enough, and the system, clearly elated, affirms it is satisfied. With that, an awkward silence settles in the room. The girl dresses again, and somewhat embarrassed, Hao Han tries to form an apology, but is interrupted by a notification announcing his level up and the points received by the system as promised. In front of him, more cards appear, ready to be drawn. He then smiles, but just as he was about to choose one, the creature slams hard against the entrance door. Lin Fei becomes distressed, exclaiming that they had already been discovered. So then, with no time to think, instead of choosing just one of the cards at his disposal, Hao Han pulls all three at once. His eyes take on an electrifying aspect, and power flows through his entire body as diamond gauntlets emerge from his fists. At that same moment,